Happy Thursday. Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast, going live on YouTube at our YouTube channel and Illini Inquirer. You can check that out. Give us a like, subscribe to us, but it's time for more Illinois basketball offseason talk. And we're sitting here waiting for any kind of news, any kind of visits, any more buzz with some transfers. And I figured to fill that void, let's bring in our guy. He's become a big national college basketball voice here at 24/7 Sports, and Illini Inquirer alum, former Illini Inquirer intern. It's Isaac Trotter. What's up, man? It's been what's keeping you busy right now, huh?
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's on steroids. The transfer portal is on steroids, and it's super fun. I think for us who like free agency, we really get into stuff like this because it just never changes, and you're excited about the potential and all of these things. But my God, it feels like there's tons of different names that add every day, and then just the stories you hear from behind the scenes. It's like one day this kid's trending this direction, then the next day he's going to this school, and this is the money that he needs here, and then this is happening, and there's just a lot going on. I can't imagine even being a coach going through this process, because this is kind of like a nightmare for all of them who are trying to build rosters, and there's just so many names and so many positions and so many different factors that they have to try to all balance all at the same time.
So Isaac, you grew up with a certain style of basketball, but a lot of people don't like what's happening in college basketball. The fact that you can't watch Jaden Epps at Illinois for 4 years, right? Or kind of the team develop like that. It's a different style of putting together rosters. It seems like it's year to year now. But give me what do you think of this? Do you enjoy this with college basketball? I don't want you to speak for your entire generation of Gen Zers here, but do you enjoy this? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I personally do enjoy it. I understand people who don't like it, and I understand that. Like, I get wanting to see a guy come in and watch it go for 4 or 5 years, but I enjoy the never-ending, ability to change and evolve your roster. I think there were times in the past where you've seen teams that were buried at the bottom of the standings. They couldn't really do much about it. And now there's just 1 year rebuilds. We've seen a lot of teams that go from really bad to pretty darn good really quickly. Now, can you win a title in a year? I think that's a real question. But I think there's no doubt that you can upgrade your roster and get yourself in position to be in position really quickly. And so those are the things that I enjoy about it, because it's you're not locked into being bad. If you're bad 1 year, that doesn't mean you're necessarily bad the next year. You can continually add talent. I get it's frustrating, but if you're at a program like Illinois, who has an NIL based setup and you have decent success to sell, there's no reason why you can't be competitive every single year, and you just give yourself bites at the apple. And I don't think that was necessarily the case back when I first started loving college basketball. So that's the fun part that I enjoy. And then just I enjoy that the kids have options. I really do. I think that makes a ton of sense. And we're seeing kids that mean a lot to these schools or programs. They're able to get paid. They're able to make some really good money for themselves, and they're able to control what they want. And that opens up a whole can of worms. But I think it is a good thing for college basketball. They just have to find a way to maybe massage it a little bit more so it's a little bit easier for everybody to digest.
Yeah, I think of John Gross. I think he would have loved the transfer portal if he had that, right? The ability to, hey, we didn't get the guy we wanted in high school getting a point guard, so let's just go get the mid-major point guard. Maybe I can go get DJ Cooper, bring him along with me if I wanted to. Maybe that changes things for him. So, or this past year, I mean, we can look at this past year as a disappointment for Illinois, but 5-6 years ago, Isaac, Illinois probably misses the tournament. It's not a very good year. Instead, they're in the Big Ten race until the final week, and they make an NCAA tournament because they're able to go get Terence Shannon and Matthew Meyer. And so yeah, there's the negative part of it, but for a school like Illinois and for a lot of schools, there's a positive of it as well. There's give and there's take.
Agreed. And I think that the NCAA can help out these schools a little bit too. The new memo that came out about 2-time transfers really does change the field a little bit, because it's going to make these guys who are freshmen, who are entering the transfer portal one time, those are going to become the most coveted assets in all of college basketball, more coveted than the best players in the transfer, or best, players in the high school ranks, maybe even more coveted than those awesome 1-year rentals. But with this new rule where you can't transfer a second time, that means you're kind of locked in for a couple years. So if you have the Jaden Epps, for example, is a really valuable asset. If you don't think he's going to go to the NBA and next year or the year after, and you have 2 years of him, most likely with the new rules, before he becomes a graduate and then can go wherever he wants, that really impacts your roster building too. And then the other thing with NIL, I wonder if we're going to see a situation where we have 2-year contracts for NIL, similar to what Nigel Pack got down in Miami. that could also change things a little bit too. So you have a little bit more flexibility from a roster building perspective and understanding, hey, we got this guy. We're going to hand him a decent amount of money. And we know he's not just going to bounce after 1 year for something else. So those are the two different tweaks that I think could be coming eventually that will end up really helping the transfer portal become more, easier to digest, easier to enjoy for people who might not love all the movement all the time.
Yeah. I'm not a legal expert, but there's so much going on in the legal field with the NCAA. And if they become employees, well, most of us employees sign contracts and we have to live up to those at some point. Like there are ways of breaking them, but it can be painful and costly. So we will dive into some potential options for Illinois, but what are you seeing across the country about how coaches are reacting to all of this, Isaac?
Yeah, I think that coaches have to change on a dime. I think Mike Woodson does not necessarily love the transfer portal, but what you've seen at Indiana so far this cycle, super aggressive, understanding he needs to upgrade the roster. You look at guys like Dan Hurley at UConn, and he had a really nice, like tightly wound group, and he brought in really good recruits, and they're there for a few years. But he went out in the transfer portal and kind of used it to get their Alfonso Plumbers and find like the nice little role players that help them get over the top and win the title. So I don't think there's an exact science for how to build things, but I don't think a lot of coaches really like that the transfer portal windows opened right after the selection Sunday. That was a real problem. So I think if you push that back a couple weeks to like after the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, that would be a really nice boost for the rest of the thing and make some more coaches happy. But we're seeing coaches throughout the country be really aggressive. I think we know what Eric Musselman at Arkansas wants to do. We kind of know what Nate Oates at Alabama wants to do. They're going to be in on everybody. You're going to see Alabama and Arkansas connected or contacting everybody. But the schools that are able to find the perfect fits for them and also understand and sell like, hey, like this is our fit and opportunity that we have here is better than what you can at other places. I think those schools are the ones that are going to really be beneficial and kind of come out as winners, because we'll see a lot of big names that don't necessarily hit in the transfer portal. Yeah. But the ones that do hit, we tend to see a lot of those same factors where it's like, hey, they understood the fit. They understood what they're bringing to the table. Everybody was on the same page, and then good things happen.
Can I bring up one Big Ten guy so far? I guess there's a few of them. So I'll just throw some of them out there. I mean, Jamison Battle, Ohio State, Peyton Sparks, the Ball State center, goes to Indiana. If there's any more, Isaac, like what's the most impactful one so far for the Big Ten?
So far, it's Jamison Battle to Ohio State. I think that was like the perfect fit for what they needed. They really had a hole at the 4. They needed a shot maker at the 4. I don't expect Bryce Sensabaugh to be back. He's my guy, right? Like I have to really own that one. He's probably
top Ohio State guards, man.
I do. He's probably a top 20 pick in the 2023 NBA draft. So I think getting Battle to Ohio State makes a ton of sense. That Minnesota thing continues to look weirder and weirder. And so Minnesota has to really see where they are right now. And let's remember this, Illinois and Minnesota were not that far apart a few years ago. And so like that's the downside to where you could have been at if you didn't embrace NIL and didn't embrace the transfer portal. And like you could be at a spot where you're in Minnesota where they're like, trying to put together NIL, trying to get guys on campus, not really having a ton of traction with top players in the transfer portal. And they're at the bottom of the Big Ten standings back-to-back years. So those are like those things that like you have to embrace this new age of college basketball. Illinois has done that. It's not been fully successful, but it could be a whole lot worse too.
Yeah. They would take Rich Pitino back right now. I think that's for sure. All right, Isaac. Illinois has had an eventful last couple of weeks. Jaden Epps, RJ Melendez, the biggest news heading to the portal. Dane Dangerous and Sear Harris announced they're back. Like, I'm thankful when these guys announce they're back because I think it's almost necessary now because all these fan bases are going to be worried about their players and until they hear from them. So we know we're still waiting on Coleman Hawkins, and interestingly, Terence Shannon has not declared for the draft. He's got 2 more weeks to do so, of course. And several other guys have not, including Chris Murray and a couple top 20 guys. But just what do you think of where Illinois is? Because certainly, Jaden Epps felt like a piece you could build around. And you and I think, are both higher on what RJ Melendez could be, but obviously had a really struggle of a year.
Totally. Yeah, it's frustrating to lose guys like Jaden Epps and RJ Melendez just because you want to build. And when you're constantly trying to upgrade like those supporting cast pieces, that's easier said than done. So I felt like RJ Melendez could have really You know, if he had gotten through this really brutal year and been a piece for you next year, think about the story that would have been. Think about what that you could have sold on the recruiting trail, or like, hey, we had a guy like who had every chance to transfer, decided to stay, and worked it out. That didn't work out that way.
Similar to Coleman Hawkins, right?
Totally, totally. And so now it operates into a situation where you have to find role players. And I think what we've seen is that it is okay to find role players in the transfer portal, but you thought that Jaden Epps and RJ Melendez could be stars for you one day. Maybe that's next year, maybe that's 2 years from now. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. So I wasn't necessarily surprised with Epps. I wasn't really stunned with Melendez. I'm interested why Terence Shannon keeps posting that he's at Ubben, keeps working out at Ubben, and why he hasn't decided to enter the 2023 NBA draft. And I can't help but think that RJ Melendez and Terence Shannon were a little bit correlated. I don't see a situation where RJ Melendez comes back and Terence Shannon also comes back. I just didn't think that that was feasible.
Yeah.
But I could have seen a situation where RJ Melendez was more open to coming back to Illinois if Terence Shannon was automatically gone. So those are open up. So those different type of conversations with roster building. And I do think that Shannon and Hawkins, you know, they have to go through the process. And if Shannon chooses to go through the process, they also need to give you a decision pretty quick, because that really limits who and how you attack the transfer portal, because you need to know those names or know those dates early before some other schools like, say, Indiana, who's super aggressive right now. They don't have to wait on Jalen Hood-Schifino. They don't have to wait on Trace Jackson-Davis. They both know that those guys are gone and they can sell that playing time right now. Illinois is kind of in a little bit of wait and see mode.
Yeah, and I get it for Illinois fans are seeing Indiana be uber aggressive, and I think Indiana's NIL is very robust as you'd expect it to be. But it is different situations because of that. Like, we know Hood-Schifino is going to be a first-round draft pick. We know Trace Jackson-Davis is going to be drafted, and he's going pro. Illinois doesn't quite know that of their guys quite yet. And the timing, you know, this time last year, Illinois fans are like, where are the guys? And they end up getting Terence Shannon and Matthew Meyer. And that's where the staff really needs to be plugged in. But I would imagine lead guard, right? Like, they can sell regardless of whether Shannon's coming back or Hawkins come back. It'd probably even be better if those guys came back, but you can sell that role regardless to any lead guard transfer, because there's no competition.
None. And the thing too is that, like, for the past few years, I think you've seen lead guards do their thing for the most part with Brad Underwood. So, like, I don't think there's a big concern about being a lead guard for Brad Underwood, and if that's a bad thing or a good thing. I think that's strongly a good thing. But there's like this very much of a balancing act on who you want and how like, I think if Terence Shannon comes back, you're looking at a guy who can handle maybe more of the lead point guard duties to try to get the ball out of TJ's hands a little bit. But if he's gone, I think you're trying to find a guy who can get a lot of free throw attempts and gets to the rim and is maybe an impact defender. So it's really fascinating the type of player that they go after and how that plays with or plays without Terence Shannon. And so the other thing too is that, like, when you have such a blank slate, I wonder how much this first domino impacts the rest of your transfer portal attack. So, like, those are like those interesting pieces. Like, if you land a really impactful shooter, does that mean you try to find a defender next, or how do those different things play together? And that's where it's fun. And it feels like it can change on a dime for literally everybody, because everybody throughout the country is also asking these similar questions.
Yeah, it's pretty insane when you think about it. All right, Isaac, let's break down some potential targets for Illinois. And one of the guys that I know you are high on is, as much as anybody, is a guy from Northern Colorado, Dalton Connect. He's got 1 year of eligibility, 6'6", 200 pounds, averaged 20 points per game, shot 38% from three last year. So why do you think Illinois would be a good fit for Dalton Connect, who seems to have options across the country here?
Totally. Yeah. He's one of the most sought after players in the transfer portal. He's actually on a visit today with Indiana. So, which, again, no surprise, Indiana has a lot of opportunity to sell, but like Illinois, or like Indiana, Illinois has that same type of opportunity to sell. And the thing with Connect that I really liked is he had 138 reps in pick and rolls last year. That's almost double what Terence Shannon had at Texas Tech. So he is very confident with the ball in his hands. He's not a passer, but my God, like, he can absolutely fill it up. And the one thing I really think is important with Connect is, like, are you bringing him in here to be like your lead like distributor, or do you want him to be off the ball a little bit more? Because he's a really good catch and shoot guy. I think he can attack off of kickouts and be in really good position. And he's also like a really good mid-range shooter. So like you could run some of those sets like they ran for Ayo Dosunmu. They played him off the ball, got him off multiple screens going downhill. I think you could see some similar actions like that with Dalton Connect. But again, like there's so much competition here, and you look at him and he's a pro. And so like when you're a pro, like you're going to have a ton of offers, and you get old guys who have like that hired hand mentality. People could automatically go, oh, this is Matthew Meyer again. But this Matthew Meyer worked. Like the Matthew Meyer experience absolutely worked. And I think you could see Connect coming in and average, 11, 12 points for anybody in the country. I think he's easily a top 2 or 3 offensive weapon for anybody in the country.
Yeah, as a guy who's saying it worked all year, I agree with you, except for the postseason. The postseason did not work out for Matthew Meyer. Reminds me of Baylor Shireman. Is that
a little bit?
Yeah,
a little bit. The one thing that Baylor Shireman was a little bit better at is he's more of a pass first guy.
Yeah.
Like I don't think you're going to see Connect try to pass up too much. Maybe that was just because who he was playing with. That was not a very good team. So he had to chuck it a lot. But at the end of the day, with that size and that versatility and the comfortability handling ball screens, that's really enticing. And, just the ability to make tough shots. That was one thing that I felt like Illinois didn't really have a ton of those guys. Like, and he could make a ton of tough shots, and Connect could make a ton of tough shots. Plus, like, I think he's one of those pieces that, like, I don't think he necessarily jumps off the tape defensively, but he has some length. Like, he really read passing lanes really well too. So that's the other thing. Like, what does Brad Underwood want to be next year is a really big question for me. And like, does he want to be this up-tempo team that runs a ton of ball screens? Then Connect could fit. Does he want to run a lot of spread? I don't know how Connect would fit in that thing, because he didn't really play like in a system like that in the last 3 or 4 years.
I want to bring up a guy that maybe we haven't talked about enough on here, because I think he'd be a really good fit. TJ Bomba out of Washington State, 2 years of eligibility left, 6'5", 215 guard, averaged about 16 points, shot 37% from 3 last year. I just saw that John Rothstein said he'll announce on the 14th, so a week from today. Illinois was among those schools that reached out. So what do you think of TJ Bomba and potential fit at Illinois?
He's super strong. Like he's big and he's really physical. And you look at him and you go, man, there's some Terence Shannon stuff there. Like if you like Terence Shannon's film, you're going to probably like a lot of what TJ Bomba does. He really is like meticulous in pick and rolls. Like you see him kind of slow down and like view the court that way. And sometimes people view that as a bad thing. I kind of liked it. I thought he tended to make a lot of good decisions in pick and rolls. And then obviously the catch and shoot numbers from 3 were really impressive as well too. I think, he didn't have a ton of volume. I think he shot like 100 catch and shoot threes last year, but he graded out really, really highly on that. So the other thing too, is he is a lockdown defender. Like he was one of the best defenders in the Pac-12 last year. He moves his feet really, really well. He's super physical. I think he can guard multiple positions, and you envision him playing against lead guards in the Big Ten and having a lot of success with that, like with his defensive abilities. So, and the other thing too that I liked about Bomba is he played with a lot of talent. That was a Washington State team that didn't have a great record, but they have some real talent, some real NBA potential guys on that roster. So he was fine, like finding a way to be a role player. And that's the thing. Like when we talk about the transfer portal, it's like fit and opportunity and what do you want to be? What do you envision your role at Illinois is? And if Terence Shannon comes back, I think Bomba would be just fine potentially being like the second highest usage rate on the team guy, right? Like that makes a ton of sense for him and would work well for everybody involved. So I really like his fit. Although it's been really quiet on his recruitment on who he's into and who's the teams in the lead. Like he's kept that really close to the vest. There's not been a lot of noise about him quite yet. So the fact that he's announcing, or what'd you say, Rothstein said he's announcing in the next week or so? Like that's interesting.
14th. So yeah, 8 days from now.
Yeah. All right. So like that makes me think he has somebody in mind, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I think you talked about this a little bit, but do you think he could play with Shannon? Like,
Yes, I do. I don't think he is like a lead point guard, but again, last year he had 144 pick and roll reps according to Synergy. That's a lot. That's plenty. So he was very comfortable with the ball in his hand. So I think it's one of those things where you could envision like a mid-major point guard who maybe doesn't want to have a huge role with Bomba and Shannon. That's a strong offseason. I don't think he's like the catch and shoot, like elite catch and shoot guy, because he didn't have a ton of volume on that last year. I think he averaged about 3 catch and shoot threes a game. So it's serviceable, but it's not a ton. I think he's kind of like a Matthew Meyer. Like he'll shoot a decent amount of threes, but he's not going to shoot a heavy volume like an Alfonso Plummer or like an LJ Cryer.
Well, he led me right into it. I know Brad Underwood say he doesn't love little guards, but boy, he's had some good ones at Illinois, and LJ Cryer at Baylor was really good. 2 years of eligibility, 6'1", 190, 15 points per game, just 2 assists. He shot 42% from three, 89% from the free throw line. And that is not a small sample, 3-point shooting percentage of 42%. He is a bucket, Isaac Trotter, and given what he told Brandon Jenkins, he's looking for a lead guard spot potentially. He said, I don't need to be the lead guard all the time. Well, Illinois certainly can sell that. So what do you think of the possibility of LJ Cryer in Illinois?
LJ Cryer is an A+ offseason. You get LJ Cryer and everything else makes a ton of sense. And the thing I love about LJ Cryer is it feels like he is, the Alfonso Plummer type shooter, but he does way more off the bounce too. So like you can see him get into the lane a lot. He attacks really easily. He can get to his little floaters in the mid range really, really well. And he's just a scorer. Like he's just wired to score. Now, the interesting thing with Baylor is that Adam Flagler and LJ Cryer are both on the team, and they didn't really have like a natural point guard because they're also bringing in the star freshman Keontae George. So they knew he was going to get the ball. And Adam Flagler went to the Baylor staff before the season and was like, I don't want to play point guard. And LJ Cryer goes to the staff and goes, I want to play point guard. Well, Baylor chooses to play Adam Flagler at point guard. And so, and LJ's like, what the heck? Like, I wanted to play point guard, and they didn't really let him do it. So if you look at his usage rate, I think he had the third highest usage rate on the team. And partially that was because, George is going to get his. They trusted Flagler's decision-making. So like my concern with LJ is like, I think you need to pair him with a real true point guard and then also let him have the ball as well too. Like maybe another combo-ish where they can both kind of handle it a lot.
What do you make of Ty Rodgers and LJ Cryer together?
I mean, that's a pretty strong fit, right? Like that's a pretty strong fit. Like that's the thing with LJ. I honestly think he plays well with everybody. Like, I think he fits any roster in college basketball. Like, you put him to be a catch and shoot guy in the corner, he's great. You put him to be, your number 2 guy who is, has a heavy usage rate and is maybe when Terence Shannon's off the floor operates as your number 1 option offensively. That works as well too. And so you put him with big players who can maybe, defend a lot, like a Ty or like a TJ, like that would maybe cover up some of his defensive warts. Cause I wouldn't say he's like an elite lockdown defender, but he tries on the defensive end, and there were different opportunities for him. He just was kind of surrounded by a lot of mediocre defenders. So that Baylor defense struggled, but I don't know if it was necessarily LJ Cryer's fault for those defensive, issues.
No, I want to talk about the competition here is really stiff. Houston seems to have some buzz there. Kansas State obviously has a great sell. So how do you feel like Illinois' sell can stack up here?
Yeah, I think finances is going to be a big deal for him. I think NIL is a really impactful thing. And, Matthew Meyer was on Illinois last year. And remember, Matthew committed to Illinois in late May. Yeah. And so that was like Memorial Day, right? So he was still in Baylor for a couple months. And Matt was one to talk about what NIL deal he got. And I have it on strong authority that really impacted LJ. And LJ's been one of those guys where he's into the transfer portal. This is a business decision for him. Like he's looking to make money, and that's fine. Like we all are. And he's looking to find the best fit for him. So I do think that Illinois' sell is pretty strong. I think it's going to be hard to beat Houston, because Houston's a really, really great sell for him. Like, Tremont Mark just left. Marcus Sasser just left. So, you see Jamal Shed as their main point guard. They're like, well, he's not going to have the ball in his hands a lot. But Sasser got a lot of on-ball reps last year. I expect Cryer, if he went to Houston, would have the same. They're super close to home for him. So that makes a ton of sense. The Kansas State fit, makes sense on paper, I think, a little bit more than the basketball perspective. Cam Carter's a guy that Kansas State loves, that they really wanted to let him be the stud next year. And if they add another guy, they don't really want him to take away from what Cam Carter is. So that's a question for Kansas State as well, if they're going to want to try to bring in LJ, and if that would work with that. But I've kind of view Houston as the leader right now. But if Illinois makes, what Illinois does, a strong NIL pitch, and obviously with the on-ball reps that they can give him and the chance to be honestly a star at Illinois, I think he could be that and potentially flirt with 17, 18 points a game. That's as strong a sell as ever. And then you just see what Houston's up to.
All right, I'm going to throw a name at you that we didn't talk about beforehand. So this is bad producing on my part, Isaac, but I know you're good at this and you know all these guys, so I'm not worried about it. Cormac Ryan out of Notre Dame, averaged 12 points a game last year, shot 35% from 3, 6'5", 195, shot 40% from 3 a couple years ago, was awesome in that NCAA tournament. And obviously Shrewsbury would seem like a great fit for him
Mhm.
coming in, but he's checking out his options. What do you think of Cormac Ryan?
Cormac would be a really, really strong fit if Coleman Hawkins comes back,
Hmm.
because Coleman Hawkins is like quarterback type of ways of manipulating the defense only works if you move without the basketball really well. And that's the thing I really liked about Cormac Ryan, is that he's a really strong cutter. Like he really doesn't stop moving that much. Like you're not going to see much hands on knees just hanging out on offense. Like he really moves a lot.
Boy, and cutting was not something this Illinois team did really well. Michael Tua pointed that out every week.
Well, and we saw Coleman Hawkins. He would just get so frustrated because he's standing there waiting for cuts to happen, and they're just not there. I don't think you'd have a concern with that with Cormac Ryan. I honestly am like kind of putting last year, like throw that one out. Like that was kind of a weird year for Notre Dame overall. They tried to get JJ Starling a lot more, chances to be the guy as a freshman, and that was really iffy. And the whole season honestly just kind of spiraled out of control. So I wouldn't really worry about that too much. He's an awesome catch and shoot guy. If you have Kofi on your roster, he would be the perfect complement for Kofi as well. If you're going to build around Dane Danger, there's a lot to work with there as well. If you think Dane Danger can be a guy that's going to command double teams on a consistent basis, adding Ryan makes a ton of sense. And I think he cares on the defensive end too. Like he has real size. He's not going to be some impact defender, but I think he's going to be positionally in the right spot. And is he your version of Jacob Grandison? I don't think that's crazy, even though they play a little bit different positions.
Yeah. All right, let's continue with the guards. Then we'll get into some of these bigs that could be interesting, because I feel like the Coleman Hawkins thing might have to play out a little bit on the big front. But I don't know if they have a great chance at this guy, but we know they're really interested, and that's Ace Baldwin. 2 years of eligibility left after transferring from VCU, averaged about 13 points, 6 assists, phenomenal defensive player, the kind that I think Chester Frazier would really like. Chester Frazier has connections to him. Of course, his coach just left for Penn State, and Penn State's got a few crystal balls already. But Ace Baldwin worth mentioning here?
Yeah, I think with Ace, like you kind of have to build around Ace. I think you need a ton of shooting around him. I don't know if I would love the personnel if you don't have a couple extra shooters around that can really spread the floor, but he is really good in ball screens. He's really tough. And the thing is you get an edge when he's on the floor. Like I think like he has some Andres Feliz in him where he just is so gritty and so bulldogish. Like he just cares so much about winning. And, in the NCAA tournament game, he was really nicked up against St. Mary's. He missed a ton of time, like in the game, like they go from tied or ahead to down like 18 or no, like I think it was 15 they were down, and he's still taping him up to try to get back in there. And he immediately gets in and is going after St. Mary's, even though his ankle was clearly shot. So he's just a really tough competitor. I think like Penn State makes a ton of sense for him just with all the familiarity. But I think if you bring him in and you bring Coleman Hawkins back, I think you play with an edge. Because you don't play with Ace Baldwin without really like being competitive and really nasty. And like he demands that from his team. We saw that from VCU all year long. So I think if you're looking for a culture guy, like I think there's maybe more talented players other than Ace Baldwin in the portal. But from a culture perspective and like getting guys to buy in and being a natural leader, that's kind of what he's all about.
Yeah, with Jameer Nelson off the board, like I don't feel like there's a better guy running a team, right? And that's where I feel like he's really like, yeah, LJ Cryer is a way better shooter, offensive, dynamo. But Baldwin, yeah, you mentioned just the toughness, the ability to make everybody else better and demand better. I think is why he'd be a great get if Penn State does get him, and Illinois is interested in him for a reason. So
yeah, and there were times too where he would, hold his teammates accountable very publicly for defensive miscues. Outside of Coleman last year, outside of Coleman last year, how many guys were doing that on Illinois? Not a ton.
Well, and Brad Underwood had to yell sometimes, which is kind of a hot topic around here because nobody else kind of held them accountable. We saw that a lot from Trent Frazier, Ayodesumu previously. So I love his game.
Do you think Scott Drew yells too much, the nicest guy in college basketball? Because he has a lot of transfers too. It's weird how that happens.
Yeah, it does. One guy who really intrigues me, Javion McCollum out of Siena. He's got 2 years left, averaged 16 points, 4 assists, really natural shooter. Isaac over 36%. I like him. I think he's intriguing. He's got some wildness a little bit to his game, but exactly we're talking about as a multi-year potential guard. Like I feel like he could fit the bill.
Totally. So he's on campus today, I believe, at Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's had lost Grant Sherfield. They've lost a bunch of other transfers. I think they've had 6 transfers leave. the word that I heard was that Porter Moser was going to try to get him on campus and not let him leave. They really love him, and that makes a ton of sense too, because he's just a playmaker, big shot maker. He played against good teams this year, like Siena. He was a really effective offensive dynamo for them too, and I think he's capable of running a team as well. So that makes a ton of sense. But I would be surprised if Oklahoma doesn't make a really strong push for him right now.
Yeah. A couple other guards I just want to throw out there real quick. Damien Dunn, Temple, 1 year, averaged 15 points a game, shot 35% from three. If he wants to be a role player, I think that'd be fine for a year, and especially if he was Terence Shannon, he could make some sense. Same thing with Justin Harmon, Utah Valley. I think if he's bought into just being, hey, I can start potentially at Illinois, average 14 points, but that can't be your league guards if those are your guys.
Yeah, wouldn't you view those as like your RJ Melendez replacements? Especially the Temple kid is like that's your RJ Melendez replacement. Hey, be our fourth best player, hook and trail on really good shooters, shut them down, knock down open catch and shoot threes, attack and transition, and you're set. And that's the thing. Like when you lose RJ Melendez, like that's the frustrating thing is I felt like he knew what his role was.
Yeah.
There was no question about what he knew what his role was going to be if Terence Shannon was on the roster. Now you have to, pitch that to a transfer, and that might be hard when other teams are saying, hey, follow the Brandon Pajemski route, come down, have the ball in your hands, go for 22 a game, and put yourself in NBA draft conversations. I think that's an interesting conversation for a lot of really talented guys who have options, but do they want to be a role player? That's a real question.
All right. We know the name from last year. I got to ask you, do you take another chance at Brandon Murray? Georgetown transfer, has 2 years of eligibility still left. Don't know if he'll be eligible immediately. That's a huge question with him, of course. Averaged 14 points, only shot about 40% though.
If he wants to be a role player, if that's a role player, I think it makes a lot of sense. I like his defense still. I think that there's a lot there for him defensively to be a really good player. And Georgetown was not well coached at all. Like they ran a lot of ISO heavy stuff. And there would be times where it's just, hey, Brandon Murray, you get the ball with 13 seconds on the shot clock, and now you're going to dribble it 9 times and shoot a fadeaway. And like, I think that's why like the efficiency numbers dip. So I think if you get him more in like a structured based, system, I think that could make a little bit of sense. But like the flashes from him were phenomenal. He had a couple dunks this year where he almost jumps over people for these just enormous dunks. But I mean, if you look at the new rule for the NCAA for 2-time transfers, he would not be eligible. Like coaching changes, they are not giving waivers for that allegedly. Now we'll have to really see if that goes through. And the NCAA has never been one to
maybe Brad Underwood would like that. He knows he's gonna have him in 2 years.
I mean, it's not the worst idea, I guess, but like I just don't understand why guys are trying to think they're automatically going to get this 2-time waiver because the NCAA has said no. Like I just don't. There's no precedence for them to give it to him. So like, why would they? So it's weird, even with the coaching change. Which objectively, if we're going to get on that, that's a dumb rule, by the way. If there's a coaching change, kids should be allowed to transfer, even if it's their second transfer. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it feels like if they just would have done that before, just everybody can transfer without penalty, whatever it is. Like if they would have started that like 5-6 years ago, I think maybe they wouldn't have blown up like it has now. But let's go to the front court. A guy that really intrigued me when I saw him in Vegas is the way he played. Obviously, he's a big body. Kaden Shedrick, 6'11", 231, 2 years of eligibility left, transferring from Virginia. He only averaged 6 points, 4 rebounds, a block and a half a game, but he has a high impact there. Obviously, the fit is interesting, like selling with Dane Danger and potentially Coleman Hawkins, but what do you think of Kaden Shedrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason why 55 teams or whatever reached out to him. That like a lot of people really like him, and I think it's because he knows his role. Like he is not going to come in and be like, "I want to be the next Zach Edey. I demand 40." Post-ups a game. Like that's just not who he is. So I think just defensively, he is probably the best defensive big man in the transfer portal. I think right now, I should probably have double checked that, but I'm pretty sure he is. And just the impact that he had on the defensive end was just enormous. Virginia was so much better with him on the floor defensively and offensively. So I look at him and Coleman Hawkins as the best defensive front court in the Big Ten. If that happens, you're going to get a lot of deflections, a lot of hands on the ball. And like the thing with Danger, I hate to say it like this, but like, is Dane Danger, has he shown enough to the staff that you have to like, your roster to building choices are solely centered around if Dane Danger is happy? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. And if you could have a situation where Danger's playing 20 minutes and Shedrick's playing 20 minutes and you figure it out with Coleman, there's a lot there. You can work a lot there. I don't expect to see a lot of Shedrick Danger minutes. That doesn't make a ton of sense for those two guys to play together. But if they say, hey, we'll be, a Travion Williams, Zach Edey like combo, and we'll split it 50-50 because we both foul a decent amount sometimes, that could end up working really, really well, because Shedrick is an absolute stud defensively. Like, he gets his hands on everything. It's unbelievable.
And he plays hard, man. And he's got a little skill to him offensively. Like, we were showing some video here on the YouTube. He can step out a little bit. It's not something I want him to do a lot, but unlike a Danger, I think he's at least shown the ability to do that, Isaac. So he's a little bit dynamic. And, you talk about rim running, you talk about being versatile. I think he's a guy who could hedge ball screens, right? Like, be a little bit different than just drop coverage. The
other thing too that I saw about him is that Virginia, when they will trap big men with him, so they'll have someone else guard, like say Coleman Hawkins is guarding, say Zach Edey comes back and you put Coleman Hawkins on him, they will throw Shedrick as like a double on him as well. So he's really capable of doing a ton of different things defensively. He's really well schooled on the defensive end, as you would expect at Virginia. And I agree with you that there is some untapped upside. Virginia's offense has never really that they don't really run a lot of stuff for them. He's used as a screener a ton. Yeah. And so when he got those duck in chances, he was really good. He was a good lob threat, good roll man in pick and roll. So I think he adds a different dynamic. I would say that Danger is probably a lot more skilled offensively, or you feel like he can do a lot more offensively. But like Shedrick, I feel like knows who he is and what he wants to be a little bit more. And that makes sense. Shedrick's played a lot more college basketball than Danger has as well. So that's a very interesting combination, because I really do think if Hawkins is back and you're playing a Hawkins Shedrick front court defensively, like that's some pretty scary stuff defensively that Illinois could do, regardless on who's on the perimeter.
All right, you gave me one more name you want to talk about, and I don't think he needs any introduction. I feel like I need some music, like glass shatters here. Mr. Dickinson, Hunter Dickinson, in the transfer portal. Just what a seismic move! I mean, when Kofi entered the transfer portal, I said it then. He's the best player to ever enter the transfer portal. Hunter Dickinson is the best player to ever enter the transfer portal, right?
Him and Kofi have to be in that same conversation.
Right.
It's weird. The way he did it was weird. The way how he's acting now afterward is interesting. So there's just a lot going on with Hunter Dickinson. And I just don't know if I see him in Illinois as a really awesome fit together. Like, I could understand
the reporting we could do.
Right.
It's a dream. Yeah.
We were trying to figure out a list of the best places he could go just for the storyline. Like, obviously Wisconsin has to be involved with the scumbags comment. Like, that's an all-time comment. Maryland, Ohio State, and Michigan State for obvious reasons. Yeah. And Illinois has to be involved in that because of the back and forth with Illinois fans, like his tiff with Illinois fans, the stuff with Terence Shannon, like there's a lot there. So Illinois is in that mix, but I still expect him to have his pick of the litter. Kansas has made a ton of sense from day one. Kentucky's involved with him right now. If Oscar Tshiebwe leaves, that makes sense. Arkansas had a Zoom with him. The Maryland smoke is interesting. I think Georgetown makes a ton of sense, going to play for Ed Cooley. Villanova, going to play with his old high school teammate and Justin Moore. So there's a ton of things that make sense for him. But if you bring him in, I think you have to build your entire defensive game plan to get the most out of him, or cover up his biggest warts. And does Illinois want to go back to that? I don't know.
If Coleman Hawkins and Terence Shannon are both here, I can see it.
Yeah,
I could see, because Hunter knows Terence. Coleman's openly pining for him on Twitter, which I love. And the Coleman Hunter dynamic would be, I think, fascinating. And then you get a point guard, and all of a sudden you have maybe kind of a Big Ten super team.
You do. And the thing with Dickinson too is he's a very good passer, really good passer. So and he's unselfish.
Speaking of coaching and running stuff, they didn't do much of that.
No. The thing with that too, that whole Michigan scenario is really fascinating, because I need to look this up. Hey, are they going to be the first team to have 2 first-round draft picks and an All-American and not make the NCAA tournament? Like that, I need to look that up, because that's unprecedented stuff. If Buffkin gets into the first round and if Jet stays in the first round, it'd be unprecedented stuff. And you can understand why Hunter's kind of done with it, because the thing that I keep going back to with Hunter is that they have never figured out the floor. It's been since Franz Wagner went to the NBA that he's had a high level 4 with him that got the most out of him. And so if he's looking at Illinois and going, I get to play with Coleman Hawkins, that would be the best 4 he's had since Franz Wagner. So like you kind of can see where the potential fit there for him would be intriguing. But I don't know. For him to do that, he would never be able to go back to Ann Arbor. And I would kind of be a little scared for him to play at Ann Arbor, right? Like,
I don't know if he could right now. I think he would embrace it. I think he'd kind of love it. I mean, no one's embraced being a heel more. I doubt he's going to Illinois. Like Kentucky, Georgetown, some of these other places, Syracuse has been mentioned. Some of those places make some more sense. I think we got to remember and remind our listeners, like the list we're even providing now is not a final list. Mm-hmm. Like the portal is open for another month plus here, Isaac. And we just see, I do this every time I do a live show. We're seeing Creighton guard Ryan Nemhard intends to transfer. He's a heck of a player. I would imagine, Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, who got his brother Andrew to Gonzaga. That would make a lot of sense. I would imagine most of these guys who enter the portal, who are those kind of names outside of Hunter, kind of know where they are going once they enter the portal. A lot of back channeling going on, a lot of NIL, what are the possibilities going on. But that's why I find Illinois kind of the quiet right now interesting.
It is. Can we talk about a potential player that could make a ton of sense for Creighton?
Sure.
If he chose to enter the transfer portal, Chucky Hepburn. Like that would make a ton of sense for Creighton now that Nemhard's gone. Does that open Ryan Kalkbrenner to leave? Does that open, like, there's a lot of stuff there like going on with that whole conversation with Creighton. And that's the thing, like this whole thing can change on a dime because like it has all of these, it's like this, like there's so many different, dominoes in place. Like I look at it like this, like if LJ Cryer picks Houston, or no, let's say Max Abmas picks Kansas State, then LJ Cryer can't go there. So where does he go from there? Like if Texas gets involved with Ryan Nemhard, does that like take them out of other conversations and stuff like that? So it's a very fascinating, like all of these little dominoes that are in place. And how does Illinois, get traction? How does their sell improve with or without Coleman Hawkins and Terence Shannon? I don't know. And it's one of those things where you kind of want to get somebody on board quicker because that'll will kind of impact the rest and get this snowball going downhill. It's almost like football recruiting a little bit too, or in that regard.
Yeah, and then there's a whole, we could talk about this. Brad Underwood's brought up the academic side. Like transferring some places is harder. Michigan found that out last year. I think with Terence Shannon and Illinois was there and they were able to get him in. And, we don't know exactly. No one really kind of publicly says what happened there, but obviously both schools were in the mix until the end and Illinois able to get him. And Hunter said that Michigan's academics got in the way there. Like there's a lot of things that can still play out here and a lot of names that could still enter, but this is every offseason is probably going to be this from now on, but there's just so much at stake because you don't have Jaden Epps back. You don't have RJ Melendez back. Like you not only have the potential to have to fill role players, which I don't worry about in the transfer portal age, but if Shannon goes pro, you need a bunch of scoring. Like you do. Even if Coleman comes back, you just need a lot of scoring.
Yeah. And like, that's like the thing where I talk about like how do the guys fit in place? And like, the thing is that I like is that Ty Rodgers, I think could play with anybody.
Yeah.
Luke Goody could play with anybody. I think Sincere Harris can play with pretty much anybody. I think there's a lot of room for growth there. So you like those core.
Coleman can play with absolutely anybody.
Definitely. Yeah. He already is included. Dane, I think that's a question maybe still on like how he potentially fits with certain rosters, but you have those kind of core pieces in place of role players that I'm not really concerned about, but you have got to find some real impact pieces here. And the thing is that like, there's even some names that are still floating around that are potentially thinking about going in. And I think we're going to have another we've called like this second wave of like the LJ Cryers, the Max A. Smiths, like all of those type of things. But there's going to be the 2023 NBA draft stay or go situation too. And I think we'll see a lot of people in that draft conversation who decide to leave late and then enter the transfer portal. Like Matthew Meyer was a similar one. Like when he entered the transfer portal last year at Baylor, he didn't say anything about it. And then 10 days later, he's now entering the transfer portal after going into the NBA draft. So I think that's a whole different conversation with some really good names on that list too.
Yeah. And I'll give you one. Like I'm willing to speculate. I don't cover him. I don't know what he is thinking. I know the coaches said other things, But there's a kid from Plainfield, Illinois that was a star player at Toledo that plays point guard in Ray J. Dennis. It sure would make a lot of sense.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm not reporting it, like, but like, those are the kind of guys. I don't see him as an NBA draft pick. He entered the draft. He's going to get his feedback. I wouldn't be shocked if he enters the transfer portal or guys like that.
Or think about this too. Like there's conversations. We're not kidding when you say you need a graphic to say you're staying every single year, because there's a real conversation on like, this is how much money I need to stay. And if you don't get that, you're going to enter the portal too. So like there's a lot of these people that are currently not in the transfer portal who no one thinks they're going to leave. But if they don't get the number that they think they want to stay for a second or third year, they'll enter the portal too. So it's just like that's the part of the game where I understand why coaches are frustrated or why fans can get frustrated, because that's not easy. It's like you kind of like, you're like, okay, the season ended when? Like we're 8 weeks removed from the season ending and now you're entering the portal. Like those are the frustrating things that could happen. And I do think the other thing too is as soon as these first dominoes of transfers committing, there's going to be guys on the roster too that go, wait, he's in? I don't know if I want to play with him.
Brandon Paczynski.
Totally. So like those are all of those like that's why this thing is far from over, which is why I don't think it's necessarily bad that Illinois is laying in the weeds right now. Maybe it's not bad that they haven't had like a ton of people on campus yet, but it's a situation where you kind of have to act quick when you have to pounce when that time comes.
All right, let's get a few questions, Isaac, before we get out here on our live YouTube chat. Let's talk about how underrated T. Rogers is. What do you think Ty Rogers can be next season? Because this is what I love. Like Ty Rogers comes back and you can build on it, what you saw last year, which was a guy going through some struggles, overcame it, became an important part last year. Obviously not a complete player, but I think Ty Rogers can be a star by the time he's an upperclassman. But what his sophomore year will look like will be interesting.
Yeah, I think you look at Andre Jackson from UConn and go, can you be 80% of what he does as a connector, fly around the floor, play great defense, pass, and obviously get hands on a lot of deflections and stuff, while also posting a ton of people up? Like that's the one thing that Andre Jackson does not do that Ty does, is we saw a real strong back to the basket game from him where he can bully little people. So like, I think you're going to see a Ty Rogers that, you know, I don't expect him to be Illinois' leading scorer next year, but he can be one of the most impactful role players in the Big Ten with the right roster construction around him, whether that's, you know, going for 6 or 7 rebounds a game, just three or 4 assists a game, connecting defensively, being your defensive stopper, either off the bench or in the starting lineup. Like he's a really, really impactful piece. And, you know, I think the other thing too, I like about him is it feels like he gets it. And so many guys like don't understand their role or don't know what their role is, or, you know, want to be something that they aren't. And I think he knows exactly who he is.
A top 50 guy who comes in and doesn't have the expectation that I'm going to score a bunch right away. Like the fact that in high school, like he had to be told by his coaches, hey, try and score more. Like he was trying to get his teammates involved so much. Like that, you know, can be frustrating maybe at times. And at times, like when he becomes a star, you got to take over. But I think that shows like he just makes a huge impact in winning on every way. He's not a shooter. Like right. He just isn't a shooter. Maybe he can get a little bit better. I'm most concerned about free throws. He needs to get better at the free throw line because he can get to the free throw line so easily and get so many points there. But we did see what he can do offensively with the runners, with the back downs, with his ability to finish at the rim. Just like him to maybe get a left hand around the rim.
He kind of has like some Paul Mulcahy stuff in the lane.
Got an old man game.
Yeah, a little bit. Like Paul Mulcahy's able to get in the lane and kind of do what he wants to do. And obviously, like Mulcahy's more of a traditional point guard than I think Ty will ever be. But just having that as a secondary guy that can dribble the basketball up the floor, like as low as like low IQ as that sounds, just having something like that is awesome.
Kane, I love the thought of a Jalen Pickett play style ceiling for Ty Rogers down the road. Yeah, but Jalen can shoot a little bit. Mm-hmm. He's not the best shooter, but he can shoot a little bit.
Well, my new thing now is that like I think a lot of guys who are not the most athletic are going to consider themselves the next Jalen Pickett and pickup. Like when you're going to play pickup, they're going to describe their game as, yeah, I'm like a less athletic Jalen Pickett from now on.
Booty ball, just exactly. Booty balling everybody. Kevin, just like Kofi entered the portal and came back, what are the odds guys like RJ or Jaden come back? Seems like 0 for Jaden Epps, and I would imagine 0 for RJ Melendez.
Yeah, I just don't foresee that. I think Jaden Epps has a visit to NC State lined up, which makes a ton of sense with how they play their guards. Georgetown, I just think the path for immediate playing time at those two places is going to be hard. And, you know, obviously with RJ, we'll see how it goes and who's involved. But, you know, I keep looking at RJ and thinking, like, if he transfers down like Pods, that would make a ton of sense. but there's also a lot of SEC, schools that are not that great right now that have a lot to sell. So he could be really intrigued by that amount of playing time that he can for sure walk into there.
Leo, can you address the elephant in the room? Is BU's personality and post-game press conference annex playing a role in some of these players leaving Illinois? I haven't tried to avoid this whatsoever. I think it's clear Jaden Epps and his people made it pretty clear. They did not love Brad Underwood getting on Jaden the way that he did. And I do think Brad has to know which players he can push like that. I do think he needs to hold players accountable when they make mistakes. He did play Jaden a lot. He defended RJ, played RJ a lot. He got on RJ at times, but I think you know who you're signing up for with Brad Underwood. But yeah, I do think there's an adjustment you have to make as a coach of when can I do this, when can I not. I think Brad did that at times during the season, but it is a middle ground he probably has to find of how can I hold these guys accountable, be myself, because in the transfer portal age, man, like those guys can leave right away.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Scott Drew and, super nice Christian man, always positive, has like this culture of love and, very like outspoken about trying to make a players only environment. And he has LJ Cryer transfer. He has Dale Bonner transfer. He has like real issues with Flo Thamba. Like there's like a lot going on there. It feels like it doesn't matter if you're awesome, nice, beautiful, rah type of coach. Guys will transfer if they're not happy with their roles or happy with their NIL or happy with whatever, or just don't like school. Like that's also a factor too. So I understand the frustration with, Brad's antics, or if it's like a real issue maybe, but like, there's really nice coaches that don't yell at their players either that have a ton of transfers too.
Yeah. And I have people ask me like, would you want your kid to play for a guy like that? And I'm like, as long as that guy makes my kid better and my kid improves, not only as a player, but as a person under him. And we've heard plenty of guys talk about that, whether it's Trent, DeMonte, you go through the list. We've got Terence Shannon certainly feels that way. Matthew Meyer raved about Brad Underwood, even though he said, yeah, he's an intense guy. But I thought, like they kind of got the best out of each other a little bit there for a large part of the season. So I think just depends on who you are. I am a little surprised some of the guys who committed to him out of high school, knowing who he is, knowing how he is, develop a relationship with him a little bit, that they've kind of been the ones to transfer here right away.
Yeah. Is it weird that I'm more interested or concerned with what this offense/defense looks like, what he wants that style of play to look like, than his antics? Like that's maybe more where I'm at. Like from
if I'm going to be more critical about like, it's almost like, hey, you spent all off season with this one style of play and then it was terrible and you had to switch it. Which, I wonder what you think about this hypothesis. Maybe they should have just stuck with their style of play. They might not have made the tournament. That was the issue, but I still think the 5 out, the switching might have been better at the end of the season. I just don't know if they have enough wins to get the NCAA tournament.
Maybe. Yeah. I would have liked to have it in the back pocket. I didn't like that it was all one this and then always that. And like I would like to maybe mismatch.
That was one of my 5 biggest keys of the offseason was figure out a style of play that's actually going to work for your team. Like evaluate your own team during the offseason a little bit better.
Well, and then like the transition stuff, Illinois is supposed to get a ton of free throws and make a ton of easy baskets in transition. And that never really materialized. I remember at Big Ten Media Days, Brad and I were talking about that. I'm like, he was really excited about the transition that this team could play, or he thought that they could potentially lead the country in offensive efficiency and transition. And that wasn't even remotely close, partially probably because they couldn't get stops at times, partially because of the live ball turnovers. All of those things played into it. But Illinois was supposed to be this awesome team in transition. It felt like they couldn't get to that gear.
Niall asked, do you think LJ Cryer could be a pure point guard for the Illini if he transfers? We need a distributor. No, he's not a pure point guard.
He's not a pure point guard, but I think there's more meat on the bone than a lot of people expect. I think he would be fine, but I think you probably need a second one.
Kevin, when did the dominoes start falling was the first big date we could start expecting to see the landscape clear up a little bit. I think this is the first/second wave of transfers, Isaac, and we're starting to see some of these guys whittle down lists, make decisions. And somebody else asked, like, can we wait for the lead guard and get a shooter now? Sure. I think those can happen. I'm really interested to see when the first domino falls for Illinois.
Yeah, I don't think there's one timeline that fits everything. I think every school's on different timelines. And again, I go back to it. I think that the conversations with TJ and Coleman have to become clear. Like they don't have to necessarily announce it, but if they can back channel to the staff or quietly tell the staff like what they're really going to probably end up doing, I think that'll really impact what Illinois does or their timeline. And remember, like it was Memorial Day last year for Matthew Meyer, so it can, buckle up and get ready to roll because this is going to be a wild ride for the next 6 to 8 weeks.
And Terence Shannon was NFL draft weekend, which is the last weekend of April. So
right.
Sometimes it takes time. And that can be nerve-wracking, but I do think Illinois will get talent. Like at the end, Isaac, like we talked about, guys like Justin Harmon, I feel like that's the floor for Illinois. So they're going to get some guys who can help them, but unless Shannon and Hawkins both come back, they need a dude in here as well.
I think they need two. I think you have to find two, and you have to hope that they play together well, and then you figure it out from there. Because I again, like I'm still like I don't want to say like I'm not high on Dane. Like I think there's a lot there with Dane. Like he could be a really, really impactful piece for them moving down the road. Can he be your third leading scorer next year? I think that's not unrealistic, but you have to find guys that accentuate and get the most out of him, and also maybe cover up some of the flaws on some of the other parts of the roster.
Now, if you get Shannon and Hawkins both back, just give me a lead guard and let's go to battle.
Well, I mean, you look at it, you go, I mean, LJ Cryer, mid-major guard, Terence Shannon, Coleman Hawkins, Dane Danger. Pretty feel good about that, right? Like you feel really, really good about that.
Yeah. All right, Isaac, appreciate you taking out the time to do this, man. Thank you for joining us on the live stream as well. Great insight as always.
Anytime.
All right, everybody, thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, give us a follow, rating, subscribe to us, hit the like button, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts as well. We will continue to keep you up to date throughout the college basketball offseason. Of course, have some football updates as we go along as well. So everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time on the Illini Inquirer podcast.